The summer sun blazed down on London as thousands of tourists gathered around Buckingham Palace. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her camera strap and checked her phone battery for the third time that morning. This was her dream vacation, and she wasn't going to miss capturing every single moment of her trip to England. "Come on, Jake," she called to her boyfriend, who was busy buying overpriced postcards from a street vendor. "The changing of the guard starts in 20 minutes, and I want to get the perfect spot." Jake Thompson jogged over, his face already red from the heat and excitement. He had been planning this proposal for months, and today was supposed to be the day. The ring box felt heavy in his pocket as he imagined getting down on one knee right in front of the palace gates, with the royal guards as witnesses to their love story. Sarah pushed through the crowd of tourists, her determination evident in every step. She had studied the palace layout online for weeks, memorizing the best photo spots and timing everything down to the minute. Her social media followers were expecting amazing content, and she refused to disappoint them. "Excuse me, pardon me," she muttered, squeezing between a family of Japanese tourists and an elderly couple from Germany. Everyone seemed to have the same idea: get as close as possible to the action. The royal guards were already in position near their posts, their tall black hats creating perfect silhouettes against the palace walls. The horses stood majestically beside them, their coats gleaming in the sunlight. These weren't just any horses. They were specially trained military animals, bred for discipline and used to crowds, but still powerful creatures that deserved respect. Marcus Webb, a seasoned royal guard with 5 years of service, sat atop his horse Thunder. He had seen it all during his time at the palace: tourists who tried to grab his reins, children who threw things at his horse, and adults who seemed to forget that these were real living animals doing an important job. Today felt different, though. The crowd was larger than usual, and he could sense an unusual energy in the air. Thunder shifted slightly, his ears twitching at the increasing noise from the crowd. The horse had been with Marcus for 2 years now, and they had developed a strong bond built on trust and mutual respect. Thunder knew his job well: stand still, look magnificent, and only move when commanded. But he was also a protective animal, and he could sense when people approached with the wrong intentions. Sarah finally found what she considered the perfect spot, just a few feet away from Marcus and Thunder. She pulled out her phone and started taking selfies, making sure the guard and horse were clearly visible in the background. Other tourists began to notice her prime location and started moving closer as well. "This is perfect," Sarah whispered to Jake, who was still fiddling with the ring box in his pocket. "Look how close we are. My followers are going to be so jealous." Jake nodded absently, his mind focused on his proposal plan. He had rehearsed his speech dozens of times, but now, surrounded by hundreds of strangers and facing the imposing figure of a royal guard, his confidence was starting to waver. A group of college students from Australia pushed their way closer, their voices loud and their behavior increasingly obnoxious. They had been drinking since breakfast, celebrating their graduation trip, and the combination of alcohol and excitement was making them bolder than they should have been. "Mate, check this out," one of them called to his friends, pulling out his phone to record a video. "I bet I can get that horse to react. These guards aren't supposed to move, right?" Marcus heard the comment and felt his jaw tighten slightly. This was exactly the kind of situation he had been trained to handle, but it never got easier. Tourists often saw the guards as living statues, forgetting that they were real people doing a real job, protecting one of the most important buildings in the country. The crowd continued to grow, with people pushing and shoving to get better positions. Street performers nearby were packing up their acts, knowing that once the official ceremony began, all attention would be focused on the palace. Vendors moved through the crowd, selling everything from British flag keychains to overpriced bottles of water. Sarah checked her phone again and noticed she was getting low on storage space. She quickly deleted some old photos to make room for what she was sure would be the best content of her entire trip. She had already planned her Instagram captions and couldn't wait to see the likes and comments rolling in. The Australian students were getting more animated, their voices carrying over the general buzz of the crowd. One of them, a tall, young man with bleached hair, kept pointing at Thunder and making comments about how fake everything looked. It's probably not even a real horse, he laughed, causing his friends to snicker. Everything here is just for show for the tourists. Marcus felt thunder tense slightly beneath him. The horse could sense the negative energy from the rowdy group, and his natural instincts were telling him to be on guard. Thunder had been trained to ignore distractions, but he was still an animal with protective instincts. Meanwhile, Jake was getting more nervous by the minute. The crowd was much larger than he had expected, and the noise level was making it hard to think clearly. He had imagined a romantic moment with just the two of them and the majestic guards in the background, not this chaotic scene with pushing tourists and drunk college students. The ceremony was about to begin, and the energy in the crowd reached a peak. Everyone had their cameras ready, their phones charged, and their expectations high. Sarah gripped her phone tightly, ready to capture every moment of what she was sure would be the highlight of her London adventure. Little did any of them know that they were about to witness something that would make headlines around the world, and not in the way they had hoped. The stage was set for a confrontation that would teach several tourists a lesson they would never forget about respecting both the royal guards and their magnificent horses. The morning sun continued to beat down on the crowd, and Thunder's ears twitched again, sensing that something was about to happen. As the ceremony officially began, the crowd pressed forward even more aggressively. Sarah found herself being pushed closer to Thunder than she had planned, but instead of stepping back, she saw it as an opportunity. The horse was now less than 3 feet away from her, close enough to touch. "This is incredible," she whispered to Jake, holding up her phone to take another selfie. In her excitement, she didn't notice that she was now standing in an area clearly marked with barriers that tourists weren't supposed to cross. Thunder's nostrils flared as more people crowded around his space. The horse had been trained to tolerate crowds, but there was a difference between people keeping a respectful distance and people invading his personal area. His training told him to stay still, but his instincts were becoming harder to ignore. Marcus maintained his stoic expression, but his eyes were constantly moving, assessing the situation around him. He could feel Thunder's tension increasing, and he knew from experience that it was only a matter of time before something went wrong. The problem was that he couldn't break protocol to warn the tourists. His job required him to remain silent and still, unless there was an immediate emergency. The Australian student with bleached hair, whose name was Connor, had been recording everything on his phone for the past 10 minutes. His friends were egging him on, suggesting increasingly stupid stunts to make his video more viral-worthy. "Dude, you should totally try to pet the horse," one of his friends suggested, pointing at Thunder. "I bet it won't even notice." Connor laughed and moved closer, his phone still recording. He had consumed several beers that morning and his judgment was significantly impaired. The combination of alcohol, peer pressure, and the desire for social media fame was creating a perfect storm of bad decision-making. "These horses are probably used to people touching them all the time," Connor said loudly enough for his video to pick up the audio. "They're just here for decoration anyway." Sarah heard the comment and looked over at the group of young men. Part of her was annoyed that they might interfere with her perfect photo opportunity, but another part of her was curious to see what would happen. She kept her camera ready, thinking that if something interesting occurred, she might get even better content. Jake was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. He had served in the military himself for 2 years and understood the discipline and training that went into ceremonial duties. He also knew enough about horses to recognize that Thunder was showing signs of stress. The way his ears were positioned, the slight tensing of his muscles, the way his eyes were tracking the movement of people around him. "Sarah, maybe we should step back a bit," Jake suggested quietly. "I think we're getting too close." But Sarah was too focused on her phone screen to really listen. She had noticed that the lighting was perfect at this moment, and she wanted to capture as many photos as possible while the conditions were ideal. "Just a few more shots," she replied, holding up her phone again. "Look how amazing this looks." Connor had now moved close enough to Thunder that he could have reached out and touched the horse's leg. His friends were laughing and encouraging him, their own phones recording the entire scene. None of them noticed the subtle signs that Thunder was becoming agitated. Marcus felt his horse shift weight slightly, and he knew that Thunder's patience was being tested. The guard's training had taught him to read his horse's body language, like a book, and right now every signal was telling him that Thunder was preparing to defend himself if necessary. A family with small children was also trying to get closer to the action. The parents were busy taking photos and not paying attention to their kids, who were running around excitedly and getting dangerously close to Thunder's hooves. One of the children, a boy about 6 years old, was fascinated by the horse and kept trying to duck under the barriers. "Look, Mommy, horsey!" the little boy called out, pointing at Thunder with delight. His mother glanced over briefly but was more interested in getting the perfect family photo than in supervising her son's movements. She pushed closer to the barriers herself, holding her camera high above the crowd to get a better angle. Thunder's ears flattened slightly against his head, a clear warning sign that any experienced horse handler would have recognized immediately. But the tourists around him had no experience with horses, and they missed or ignored all the signals that Thunder was sending. Connor finally decided to make his move. With his phone still recording, he reached out his hand toward Thunder's neck, intending to pet the horse for his video. His friends cheered him on, completely oblivious to the fact that they were encouraging him to potentially dangerous behavior. "This is going to get so many views," Connor said to his camera, his hand moving closer to Thunder's neck. At that exact moment, Sarah decided to try to take a selfie that included both herself and Thunder in the frame. She leaned forward and extended, her arm trying to get the perfect angle. Her phone case, which had a dangling charm attached to it, swayed in the breeze and caught Thunder's peripheral vision. The horse's head turned slightly toward the movement, and his large, dark eye fixed on Sarah's face, which was now uncomfortably close to his own. Thunder had been trained to tolerate a lot, but having strangers lean into his personal space while waving objects near his face was pushing the boundaries of his patience. Jake saw what was happening and felt his heart rate increase. He had been around military horses before, and he knew that even the best trained animals had their limits. He could see the tension in Thunder's body language, and he knew that the situation was about to escalate. "Sarah, please step back now," he said more firmly, reaching for her arm, but Sarah was too caught up in getting her perfect shot. She adjusted her position again, trying to get both Thunder and Marcus in the frame behind her. Her movement brought her even closer to the horse, and her dangling phone charm continued to catch the light and move in Thunder's peripheral vision. Connor's hand was now only inches away from Thunder's neck. The other tourists continued to press forward, creating a chaotic scene of pushing, shoving, and excited chatter. The noise level was increasing, and Thunder could feel the stress of being surrounded by so many unpredictable humans. Marcus maintained his professional composure, but internally he was preparing for what he knew was about to happen. His years of experience had taught him to recognize the warning signs, and every instinct was telling him that Thunder was reaching his breaking point. The little boy who had been trying to get closer to the horse finally succeeded in ducking under one of the barriers. His parents were still distracted by their cameras and didn't notice their son moving into the area where tourists weren't supposed to go. Thunder felt the child's small presence near his legs and tensed even more. The horse's protective instincts were now in direct conflict with his training, and the combination of the rowdy college students, the invasive tourists with cameras, and the small child in a dangerous position was creating a perfect storm. The moment of crisis was approaching rapidly, and none of the tourists seemed to understand the danger they were putting themselves in. Thunder's breathing became slightly heavier as the chaos around him intensified. The magnificent horse had endured countless ceremonies, parades, and tourist encounters, but today felt different. The combination of aggressive tourists, invasive behavior, and complete disregard for basic safety was pushing him beyond his considerable tolerance. Connor's hand was now hovering just inches from Thunder's neck, his phone recording everything. His friends continued to cheer him on, completely unaware that they were encouraging potentially dangerous behavior. The alcohol in Connor's system had eliminated whatever common sense he might have possessed about approaching unfamiliar animals. "Come on, mate, just touch him already," one of his friends called out, laughing. "What's the worst that could happen?" Sarah, meanwhile, was trying to position herself for what she hoped would be the perfect selfie. She leaned even closer to Thunder, her phone extended at arm's length. The decorative charm on her phone case continued to catch the sunlight, creating small flashes of light that irritated Thunder's sensitive eyes. "This is going to look amazing," she whispered to herself, completely focused on her phone screen and oblivious to the warning signs that Thunder was displaying. Jake felt a growing sense of dread as he watched the situation unfold. His military background had taught him to recognize when a situation was about to spiral out of control, and every instinct he had was screaming that disaster was imminent. "Sarah, seriously, we need to move back right now," he said, grabbing her arm more firmly. "Something's not right here." But Sarah shrugged him off, too caught up in the excitement of the moment. "You're being paranoid," she replied. "It's just a horse. They do this every day." The little boy who had managed to slip past the barriers was now standing directly beside Thunder's front legs, his small hands reaching up toward the horse's stomach. His parents were still completely absorbed in taking photos and hadn't noticed that their child had wandered into a potentially dangerous situation. Thunder felt the child's presence and his protective instincts warred with his training. The horse's ears swiveled back and forth, trying to track all the different threats and distractions around him. His tail swished with increasing agitation, another clear warning sign that the experienced Marcus recognized immediately. Marcus knew he was facing a dilemma. His orders were to remain silent and motionless during the ceremony, but he could feel Thunder's tension building to a dangerous level. The guard's years of experience told him that his horse was approaching the point where instinct would override training. Connor finally made contact, placing his palm on Thunder's neck while grinning at his phone camera. "See? Totally harmless," he said to his recording, completely unaware that his touch was the final straw. Thunder's entire body tensed at the unexpected contact from a stranger. The horse had been conditioned to accept touch from Marcus and other handlers, but Connor's unfamiliar scent, combined with his aggressive energy and the alcohol on his breath, triggered every alarm in Thunder's mind. At that exact moment, Sarah leaned forward even further to get her selfie, bringing her face uncomfortably close to Thunder's head. The movement was sudden and invasive, and Thunder interpreted it as a potential threat. The horse's natural flight or fight response finally overcame his extensive training. Thunder's head jerked up sharply, striking Sarah's outstretched phone and sending it flying through the air. The sudden movement startled everyone around him, including Connor, who stumbled backward in surprise. "Whoa!" Connor shouted, his own phone nearly dropping from his hands. "Did you see that?" Sarah gasped as she watched her expensive phone tumble through the air before crashing onto the pavement. Several feet away, the screen shattered on impact, destroying not only the device but also all the photos she had been taking throughout the morning. "My phone!" she cried out, instinctively moving toward where it had landed. But Thunder wasn't finished. The horse's protective instincts were now fully activated, and he perceived the crowd of tourists as a threat that needed to be addressed. His ears flattened completely against his head, and he let out a sharp snort that was unmistakably a warning. The little boy near Thunder's legs looked up at the commotion and began to cry, frightened by the sudden change in the atmosphere. His wailing only added to Thunder's stress, and the horse began to shift his weight from foot to foot, preparing to move. Marcus felt Thunder's muscles bunching beneath him and knew that he had to act quickly. His training had prepared him for this exact scenario, but it was always challenging when it actually happened. He subtly tightened his grip on the reins and applied gentle pressure with his legs, trying to communicate calm and control to his agitated mount. The crowd around them was beginning to realize that something was wrong, but instead of backing away, many people pushed forward even more, eager to capture the drama on their cameras. The modern obsession with recording everything was making the situation worse rather than better. "Are you getting this?" one tourist asked her husband, holding up her phone to record Thunder's agitated state. "Oh my God, this is crazy," another person shouted, their own phone aimed at the scene. Connor, his initial bravado shaken by Thunder's reaction, tried to play it off for his video. "Well, that was unexpected," he laughed nervously, but his friends could see that he was rattled. Sarah was now on her hands and knees, trying to reach her shattered phone while staying close to Thunder's hooves. Her desperation to retrieve her device was overriding any sense of self-preservation she might have had. "Sarah, leave the phone," Jake shouted, finally understanding the full danger of the situation. "Get away from the horse." Thunder's breathing was becoming more labored, and white foam was beginning to appear around his mouth, a clear sign of extreme stress in horses. The animal was caught between his training to remain still and his natural instincts to protect himself and his rider from what he perceived as threats. Marcus made a split-second decision. Protocol demanded that he remain silent and motionless, but his horse's welfare and the safety of the civilians around him took priority. He broke his ceremonial stance slightly, shifting his weight to better control Thunder's movements. The other royal guards positioned nearby were also becoming alert to the situation. While they couldn't break formation completely, they were preparing to respond if the situation escalated further. The ceremony was supposed to continue regardless of distractions, but public safety always came first. Thunder took a step backward, his hooves clicking sharply on the pavement. The sound made several tourists gasp and finally begin to realize that they might be in actual danger, but it was too late. They had pushed the situation too far, and Thunder was no longer the calm, controlled ceremonial horse they had assumed he was. The proud military mount was now operating on pure instinct, and everyone around him was about to learn a harsh lesson about respecting both the royal guards and their magnificent but powerful animals. Thunder's backward step was followed by a sharp whinny that cut through all the tourist chatter like a blade. The sound was not the gentle neighing that people might hear in movies. It was a warning cry from a powerful military horse who had reached his absolute limit. Sarah was still scrambling on the ground, desperately trying to gather the pieces of her shattered phone. Glass fragments had scattered across the pavement, and she was so focused on salvaging her device that she didn't notice Thunder's increasingly agitated state directly above her. "My photos," she wailed, holding up the broken phone with tears in her eyes. "All my vacation photos are gone." Jake lunged forward and grabbed Sarah by the shoulders, trying to pull her away from Thunder's hooves. "Forget the stupid phone," he shouted. "We need to get out of here right now." But Sarah resisted, still fixated on her broken device. In her mind, losing those photos was like losing the entire purpose of her vacation. She had spent months planning this trip specifically for social media content, and now it was all destroyed. Connor and his friends were still recording, but their laughter had stopped. Thunder's warning whinny had sobered them up enough to realize that this wasn't as funny as they had thought. However, instead of moving away, they stayed in place, mesmerized by the drama unfolding in front of them. "This is insane," one of Connor's friends whispered, his phone still recording. "That horse looks really angry." Thunder's eyes rolled, showing the whites, a clear sign of extreme agitation in horses. His nostrils flared wide as he took deep, rapid breaths. The horse's entire body was tense, every muscle ready for action. Marcus could feel the power coiled beneath him like a spring ready to explode. The little boy who had been near Thunder's legs was now crying loudly, adding to the chaos. His parents finally looked up from their cameras and saw their son in danger, but they were too far away to reach him quickly. The crowd between them and their child was too thick to push through easily. "Tommy!" the mother screamed. "Get away! From there!" Her shout only added to the noise and confusion, making Thunder even more agitated. The horse's training had prepared him for many situations, but not for this level of chaos and disrespect from so many people at once. Marcus knew he had to act decisively. He could feel Thunder gathering himself for a more dramatic response, and he couldn't let civilians get hurt on his watch. Breaking protocol completely, he spoke in a loud, commanding voice that carried clearly over the crowd. "Clear the area immediately," Marcus shouted, his trained voice cutting through all other noise. "Move back now." The authority in his voice was unmistakable, and many tourists finally began to realize that this wasn't part of the show. But some people were too slow to react, and others were actually moving closer, thinking that the guard's dramatic shout was part of the ceremony. Thunder had had enough. With a powerful surge of muscle and determination, the horse reared up on his hind legs, his front hooves pawing the air in a display of raw power that sent shockwaves through the crowd. Sarah screamed as she saw Thunder's hooves directly above Her, finally abandoning her broken phone and scrambling backward on her hands and knees. The sight of the massive horse rearing up had instantly cured her obsession with recovering her device. Connor dropped his phone in shock, his mouth falling open as he witnessed Thunder's impressive display of strength and agitation. The horse was magnificent and terrifying at the same time, and Connor finally understood that he had been playing with forces far beyond his control. "Holy shit," Connor whispered, all his earlier bravado completely gone. When Thunder came back, down, his hooves struck the pavement with a sound like thunder, which seemed perfectly appropriate given his name. The impact sent vibrations through the ground that everyone nearby could feel through their feet. Marcus rode the rear expertly, his years of training keeping him perfectly balanced even as Thunder expressed his displeasure. The guard's skill was evident in how he maintained control while allowing his horse to communicate his distress to the crowd. The little boy's father finally pushed through the crowd and scooped up his son, carrying the crying child to safety. Other parents in the crowd began pulling their own children back, finally recognizing the real danger of the situation. But Thunder wasn't finished making his point. The horse began to pace sideways, his hooves clicking sharply on the pavement, with each step. His head was held high, his ears still pinned back, and his entire posture radiated power and warning. Jake finally succeeded in pulling Sarah to her feet and dragging her several steps away from Thunder. Sarah's face was pale with shock, and she was trembling as the reality of what had almost happened began to sink in. "I could have been killed," she whispered, staring at Thunder with new respect and fear. "That's what I was trying to tell you," Jake replied, his own heart still pounding. The proposal he had planned was completely forgotten now. All he cared about was getting Sarah to safety. Connor and his friends were backing away now, their party mood completely destroyed. The video they had been so excited to create had turned into a nightmare that they just wanted to escape from. Connor's hands were shaking as he bent down to retrieve his dropped phone. Thunder continued his sideways pacing, each step deliberate and powerful. Marcus was using subtle cues to guide the horse's movement, ensuring that Thunder could express his agitation without actually hurting anyone. The guard's skill was keeping a dangerous situation from becoming a deadly one. Other royal guards were now moving into position, ready to assist if needed. They maintained their ceremonial composure, but their alert posture showed that they were prepared to act if the situation escalated further. The crowd was finally beginning to thin out as people realized this wasn't entertainment. It was a real confrontation with a powerful animal who had been pushed too far. But some tourists were still hanging around, their phones still recording, hoping to capture more dramatic footage. A palace security officer was pushing through the crowd, speaking rapidly into his radio. Protocol demanded that incidents like this be handled swiftly and professionally with minimal disruption to normal operations. Thunder's message was clear to everyone now. He was not a prop, not a decoration, and not a toy for tourists to play with. He was a trained military horse deserving of respect, and he would defend himself and his rider if necessary. The horse's powerful display had lasted only a few minutes, but it had completely changed the atmosphere around the palace. The tourists, who remained, were keeping a much more respectful distance, and the rowdy behavior that had started the incident was nowhere to be seen. Marcus could feel Thunder beginning to calm down slightly, but the horse was still alert and ready to react, if threatened again. The guard knew that it would take time for his mount to fully relax after such an intense confrontation. The aftermath and lessons learned. The security officer reached Marcus and Thunder within minutes, his professional demeanor immediately taking control of the chaotic situation. Officer Williams had dealt with similar incidents before, though none quite as dramatic as what had just unfolded. "Sir, are you and your mount secure?" Officer Williams asked Marcus, using the formal protocol required when addressing the royal guards during duty. Marcus gave a subtle nod while maintaining his ceremonial posture as much as possible. Thunder was still alert and breathing heavily, but the horse's aggressive posturing had subsided somewhat. The immediate danger had passed, but the aftermath was just beginning. Sarah sat on a nearby bench where Jake had guided her, staring at the remains of her shattered phone. The reality of what had happened was slowly sinking in, and she was beginning to understand how foolish her behavior had been. "I can't believe I almost got trampled for a stupid selfie," she whispered, her voice shaking. "What was I thinking?" Jake sat beside her, relieved that she was finally recognizing the severity of the situation. "You weren't thinking," he replied gently but honestly. "None of us were. We got caught up in the excitement and forgot that these are real animals with real feelings and instincts." Connor and his friends had retreated to the far edge of the crowd, their earlier enthusiasm completely deflated. Connor looked at the video he had recorded, and instead of feeling proud of his content, he felt embarrassed and ashamed. The footage showed him behaving like an entitled tourist with no respect for the traditions or safety protocols of the place he was visiting. "We should delete this," Connor said quietly to his friends. "This isn't funny. We could have gotten someone hurt." His friends nodded in agreement, all of them sobered by Thunder's powerful demonstration. The alcohol-fueled bravado that had driven their behavior earlier had evaporated completely, replaced by genuine remorse and understanding. Officer Williams began speaking to the gathered crowd, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to managing difficult situations. "Ladies and gentlemen, please maintain a respectful distance from all royal guards and their horses," he announced. "These are working military personnel and animals, not tourist attractions. Physical contact with the horses is strictly prohibited for your safety and theirs." The crowd listened attentively, many people looking embarrassed as they realized their own behavior had contributed to the problem. Parents pulled their children closer, and camera phones were lowered as people began to show proper respect. Thunder's breathing was gradually returning to normal, but his ears remained alert, swiveling to track any movement or sound that might indicate another threat. Marcus continued to communicate with his horse through subtle cues, reassuring Thunder that the situation was under control. An elderly British gentleman who had been watching from a safe distance approached Sarah and Jake. His name was Henry Richardson, a retired military officer who had served with the Horse Guards decades earlier. "Young lady," he said kindly but firmly to Sarah, "I hope you understand how fortunate you are. That horse showed remarkable restraint. A less well-trained animal might have seriously injured you." Sarah looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "I know," she replied. "I was being stupid. I just wanted the perfect photo for my social media, and I forgot that the horse was a living creature." Henry nodded approvingly at her honesty. "These horses undergo years of training to serve alongside our guards. They're bred for temperament and discipline, but they're still powerful animals with natural instincts. When you invaded his personal space and ignored all his warning signals, he had no choice but to defend himself." Jake extended his hand to Henry. "Thank you for explaining that, sir. We're Americans and we don't have traditions like this at home. We should have educated ourselves better before coming here." Henry shook Jake's hand warmly. "That's exactly the right attitude, young man. Travel should be about learning and respecting other cultures, not just taking photos to show off." Meanwhile, Connor had worked up the courage to approach Officer Williams. His face was red with embarrassment, but he knew he owed an apology to everyone involved. "Sir," Connor said hesitantly, "I want to apologize for my behavior. I was drunk and stupid, and I didn't think about the consequences of my actions. Is there anything I can do to make this right?" Officer Williams studied Connor for a moment, then nodded approvingly. "The fact that you're taking responsibility shows maturity, son. The best thing you can do is learn from this experience and share that learning with others. Maybe your friends back home will think twice before behaving disrespectfully when they travel." Connor nodded eagerly. "Absolutely, sir. I'm going to delete the video I took and maybe write about what really happened instead. How we almost caused someone to get hurt because we were being disrespectful." The crowd had largely dispersed by now, with most tourists maintaining a much more appropriate distance from the royal guards. The ceremony continued as planned, but with a notably more respectful atmosphere than had existed earlier. Thunder was finally beginning to relax, his posture returning to the calm alertness that was his normal state during ceremonial duties. Marcus felt proud of his horse for handling such a difficult situation with as much restraint as he had shown. Many animals would have reacted much more violently when faced with such provocation. Sarah stood up from the bench and walked slowly toward the barriers, staying at a respectful distance but wanting to see Thunder now that she understood what she was looking at. The horse was magnificent, powerful, intelligent, and dignified. She felt ashamed that she had treated such a noble animal as nothing more than a photo prop. "I'm sorry," she whispered, knowing that Thunder couldn't understand her words but hoping that her respectful demeanor might somehow communicate her remorse. Jake joined her, and together they watched the remainder of the ceremony with a new appreciation for the skill, training, and dedication it represented. The royal guards and their horses weren't just tourist attractions. They were living symbols of tradition, discipline, and service. Officer Williams made a note in his incident report, documenting what had happened for future reference. These reports helped the palace staff identify patterns and develop better strategies for managing tourist behavior and preventing similar incidents. As the ceremony concluded, Thunder remained calm and professional, his brief moment of rebellion completely under control. The horse had successfully communicated his boundaries without causing any serious harm, and the tourists who had witnessed his display would hopefully think twice before behaving so disrespectfully in the future. The morning that had started, with excitement and anticipation, had become a powerful lesson in respect, responsibility, and the consequences of thoughtless behavior, lasting impact and new understanding. 3 hours after the incident, the palace grounds had returned to their normal, peaceful atmosphere. The ceremony had concluded successfully, and most of the tourists had moved on to other attractions. However, the events of the morning had left lasting impressions on everyone involved. Sarah and Jake sat in a nearby cafe, nursing cups of tea and reflecting on what had happened. Sarah had purchased a cheap replacement phone from a local shop, but she hadn't taken a single photo since the incident. Her entire perspective on travel and social media had shifted dramatically in just a few hours. "You know what's strange?" Sarah said, stirring her tea thoughtfully. "I feel like I saw more in those few minutes of watching Thunder properly than I did in all the time I spent trying to get the perfect selfie." Jake nodded, remembering his abandoned proposal plans. The ring was still in his pocket, but the moment didn't feel right anymore. He had planned to propose in front of the royal guards as a symbol of tradition and permanence, but now he understood that real meaningful moments couldn't be forced or manufactured for social media. "Maybe that's the point," Jake replied. "When we're so focused on capturing experiences for other people to see, we miss out on actually having the experiences ourselves." At a different cafe across the street, Connor was writing a long post on his phone, trying to put his thoughts into words. His friends had returned to their hotel to sleep off their hangovers, but Connor couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. His post began, "Today I learned that being a tourist doesn't give you the right to be disrespectful. I almost caused someone to get seriously hurt because I was more interested in getting likes on social media than in appreciating the culture and traditions I was visiting." He went on to describe the incident honestly, taking full responsibility for his role in escalating the situation. Instead of posting the video he had originally planned, he was sharing a message about the importance of respectful travel and the dangers of treating living beings as props for entertainment. Back at the palace, Marcus was going through the post-ceremony routine with Thunder. The horse was completely calm now, but Marcus was carefully checking him over for any signs of stress or injury. Thunder's health and well-being were always the top priority, and incidents like this morning's required extra attention. "You did good today, boy," Marcus murmured quietly to Thunder as he brushed the horse's coat. "You showed them what happens when people forget their manners, but you kept everyone safe." Thunder responded to the familiar voice and gentle touch, his earlier agitation completely forgotten. The horse lived in the moment, unlike humans who might dwell on stressful experiences. For Thunder, the incident was over, and he was ready to move on to the next part of his day. Officer Williams was completing his incident report in the security office. This wasn't the first time tourists had behaved inappropriately around the royal guards, and it wouldn't be the last. However, the dramatic nature of Thunder's response and the fact that several people had learned genuine lessons from the experience made this incident somewhat different from the usual minor infractions. We might want to consider additional signage about maintaining distance from the horses, Williams noted in his report, and perhaps a brief educational announcement before each ceremony about proper behavior and safety protocols. Meanwhile, Henry Richardson, the elderly gentleman who had spoken to Sarah and Jake, was having lunch with his wife Margaret. He had told her about the morning's events, and she was both concerned and impressed by how the situation had been handled. "It sounds like those young people learned something valuable," Margaret said, "though it's a shame it took such a dramatic incident to teach them basic respect." Henry nodded thoughtfully. "The guards and their horses handle these situations with remarkable professionalism. But tourists today seem to think everything exists for their entertainment. They forget that real people and animals are involved." As the afternoon progressed, the story began to spread through social media, but not in the way anyone had originally planned. Instead of the viral selfies and boastful videos that Sarah and Connor had initially intended to share, the incident was being discussed as a cautionary tale about respectful travel and the importance of understanding local customs and safety protocols. Sarah had written her own post, sharing a photo of her broken phone with a caption about learning that some experiences are more important than documenting them. Her followers were surprised by the thoughtful message, and many commented that they had never considered how their behavior might affect the people and animals they encountered while traveling. Connor's post was being shared widely, with people praising his honesty and willingness to admit his mistakes. Several of his friends from university commented that his message had made them reconsider their own planned spring break behavior. Back at their hotel that evening, Jake finally found the right moment for his proposal. Instead of the grand gesture he had originally planned in front of the palace, he chose the quiet privacy of their room, where his words could be genuine and personal rather than performed for others. "Sarah," he said, getting down on one knee, with the ring he had carried all day, "today showed me that the best moments in life aren't the ones we stage for other people. They're the ones we share with the people who matter most." Sarah said yes, and they celebrated quietly, taking a single simple photo together with her cheap replacement phone. The image wasn't perfect, the lighting was ordinary, their hair was messy from the long day, and the hotel room wasn't particularly romantic, but it captured a genuine moment of joy and love, which made it more valuable than any carefully staged palace selfie could have been. Thunder spent the evening in his stable, enjoying his usual routine of grooming, feeding, and rest. The horse had no awareness of the social media discussions or the lessons that humans were learning from his actions. For Thunder, he had simply done what any self-respecting horse would do when pushed beyond his limits. He had communicated his boundaries clearly and effectively. Marcus finished his shift knowing that he and Thunder had handled a difficult situation professionally. The incident would be discussed in training sessions as an example of how to manage civilian interactions while maintaining both discipline and safety. Officer Williams included a note in his report recommending that Thunder receive a commendation for his restraint and professionalism during the incident. The horse had managed to make his point dramatically without actually harming anyone, which demonstrated both excellent training and natural intelligence. As night fell over London, the palace returned to its quiet dignity. The royal guards continued their duties with the same dedication they had shown for centuries, their horses standing patient and alert beside them. The tourists had learned their lessons and moved on, but the traditions they had briefly disrupted continued unchanged. The incident had lasted less than 10 minutes, but its effects would ripple outward for months as people shared the story and reflected on their own travel behavior. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come not from careful planning or formal education, but from moments of genuine consequence that force us to confront our assumptions and reconsider our actions. Thunder had taught several humans about respect, boundaries, and the importance of recognizing the dignity of all living beings. It was a lesson they would carry with them for the rest of their lives, making them better travelers and more thoughtful people. In his own way, the Royal Guard's horse had served his country and his traditions as effectively as any human guardian of the realm.